My daughter's ex tried to steal my dead daughter's $25 million empire. My name is Harold Peterson, and 3 hours ago I watched Preston Whitmore III humiliate himself in front of Portland's entire art community. 9 years ago, this man abandoned my daughter Emily when she was broke and desperate, called her art finger painting for people who shop at Target, told her to quit dreaming and marry an accountant. Last night he crashed Emily's memorial exhibition demanding half her fortune. Treated me like some clueless retiree who'd stumble over legal papers and hand him millions. He was wrong. I let him rant, let him threaten, let him call me a mailman who got lucky in front of 200 witnesses. Then I played Emily's recording of their final conversation. You know what this story taught me about entitled people? They always underestimate quiet folks who've been planning their response for 9 years. If you're watching this, hit subscribe. I've got more stories about people who learned expensive lessons about respect. And believe me, this one gets much worse for Preston before it gets better. Because Emily didn't just leave me money. She left me the perfect trap. The Whitfield Gallery's marble walls gleamed under spotlights that November evening. 20-foot ceilings showcased Emily's paintings, each one worth more than I made in 5 years at the Postal Service. 200 guests in designer suits sipped champagne from $80 crystal flutes. I stood near Emily's centerpiece painting, Working Hands, an 8-by-6-foot canvas she'd painted of my weathered fingers holding her first paintbrush. The price tag read $340,000. I wore my best clothes, a faded polo shirt from Walmart with my old Postal Service pin, brown shoes I'd polished that morning, the same scuffed leather wallet I'd carried for 15 years with Emily's photo tucked inside. That's when Preston Whitmore III walked through the gallery doors. He hadn't changed much. Still the same perfectly styled blonde hair, the same $800 charcoal blazer, the same $15,000 Rolex catching the light. His pearl-white Tesla was parked outside, $120,000 of status symbol. Preston scanned the room like he owned it. His eyes found me standing alone by Emily's painting. He walked over with that familiar smirk. "Well, well," he said, not bothering to lower his voice, "if it isn't the mailman." Several guests turned to look. I could feel their eyes judging my clothes, my age, my place among Portland's art elite. "Hello, Preston," I said quietly. He snapped his fingers at a passing waiter. "Champagne, the expensive stuff." Then he looked me up and down. "So this is where all that money went. Pretty fancy for a dead girl who used to paint in her kitchen." I felt my hands clench, but I kept my voice steady. "Emily built something beautiful here. Emily built this with my ideas," Preston said loudly. Several more people turned our way. I was her creative partner, her muse. Half of these concepts came from our conversations when we were together. That was the first lie. "You left her," I said simply. "I took a break from the relationship," he corrected, straightening his monogrammed cufflinks. "Young artists need space to grow. I was giving her room to develop her talent." Second lie. Emily had told me the truth. Preston abandoned her the day she couldn't pay for his expensive dinners anymore. Margaret Walsh, the gallery curator, approached us. At 52, she commanded respect in Portland's art world. She'd known Emily since her struggling days. "Mr. Peterson," Margaret said warmly, "Emily spoke of you constantly. She credited you with teaching her the value of honest work." Preston's smile tightened. "And you are?" "Margaret Walsh. I manage Emily's artistic estate." She turned back to me. "Emily made very specific arrangements before she passed. She wanted to ensure her legacy remained in the right hands." Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening whisper. "Old man, let me explain something. Emily and I were common law married under Oregon state law. That gives me legal standing to claim 50% of her estate." I looked at him calmly. "Is that what your lawyer told you?" "My family's legal team researched this thoroughly." He pulled out his phone, showing me a contact list full of expensive attorneys. "We're prepared to file papers tomorrow unless we reach an understanding tonight." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps you should speak with Emily's estate attorney before making any claims." Preston waved her off like she was a waitress. "I'm not here to negotiate with hired help. I'm here to talk to the decision maker." He pointed at me. "And that's you, isn't it, mailman? The grieving father who inherited more money than he ever dreamed of seeing." The crowd around us had grown. I could hear whispered conversations, see phones discreetly recording. Preston loved an audience for his performances, but what Preston didn't know was that Emily had taught me something important about performances. The best ones save the biggest surprise for the final act. Preston gestured toward the walls lined with Emily's paintings. "Look around, old-timer. This isn't your world. These people," he indicated the well-dressed crowd, "they don't respect postal workers who get lucky. They respect power, money, influence." He was right about one thing. I didn't belong here. My 2016 Honda Accord with 127,000 miles sat in the parking garage next to BMWs and Mercedes. My monthly postal pension of $1,500 barely covered my modest ranch house payments. "Here's what's going to happen," Preston continued, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "We're going to settle this quietly. 50-50 split. I take my $12.5 million, you keep yours, and nobody has to get embarrassed." A silver-haired man in an expensive suit had moved closer to listen. Dr. Richard Hayes, according to his name tag, one of Portland's prominent art collectors. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Preston's smirk widened. "Then my legal team files papers claiming Emily's estate was built on concepts I developed during our relationship. We'll drag this through court for years. Every dirty detail of her personal life becomes public record." I felt sick thinking about Emily's memory being twisted in court documents. "We'll question her mental state when she made her will," Preston continued. "A young woman grieving her mother's death, making irrational decisions about excluding the man who loved her. Judges are sympathetic to that kind of story." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, that's—" "Shut up," Preston snapped. "This is between family." He turned back to me. "Because that's what Emily and I were. Family. For 2 years, we built dreams together. I supported her emotionally, financially, creatively. Third lie. Emily had supported Preston financially during their relationship, using money from her waitressing jobs to pay for his expensive habits. Those dreams died when you left," I said. "I didn't leave. I made a strategic business decision to pursue other opportunities while Emily found her artistic voice." Preston checked his Rolex. "Look, I don't have all night to explain complex relationship dynamics to someone who delivered mail for 40 years. The insult stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had delivered mail for 40 years. I'd lived in the same small house, shopped at the same Walmart, driven used cars my entire adult life. Preston came from a world of trust funds and country clubs, private schools, and family connections." Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I knew Emily quite well." "She never mentioned you, Mr. Whitmore." Preston's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "She was protecting our privacy. Emily understood that my family's social standing required discretion about our relationship." "Your family's social standing?" Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "The Whitmore textile fortune?" "Among others," Preston said proudly. I watched this exchange with growing understanding. Preston wasn't just after Emily's money. He needed it. His family name might open doors, but Emily's actual success made him look like a failure by comparison. "Mr. Peterson," Margaret said softly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office." Preston stepped between us. "No private meetings, no secret negotiations. We settle this right here, right now, in front of witnesses." He gestured towards the growing crowd. "These people represent Portland's art community. They deserve to know how Emily Peterson's estate will be handled." He was trying to pressure me using the crowd, but I realized something else was happening. Every art lover, gallery owner, and collector in that room had respected Emily. They'd watched her transform from a struggling waitress into one of Oregon's most celebrated contemporary artists. And now they were watching Preston try to claim credit for her success. "You want to do this publicly?" I asked. "Absolutely. Full transparency." Preston straightened his blazer. "I have nothing to hide about my relationship with Emily or my legitimate claims to her estate." Margaret caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Behind Preston, I noticed James Mitchell had arrived. Emily's attorney stood near the gallery entrance, his black leather briefcase in hand. The pieces Emily had put in place 9 years ago were finally coming together. But Preston kept talking, unaware that every word was digging his grave deeper. "Let me be clear about something, Mr. Peterson. Emily loved me. She built this empire thinking about our future together. Every painting on these walls contains pieces of conversations we shared, dreams we developed side by side. Fourth lie. And this one would cost him everything, because what Preston didn't know was that Emily had recorded some of those conversations, and I had every single one. Preston pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos. Since we're being transparent, let me show everyone some evidence of my relationship with Emily. He held up the screen, showing a picture of him and Emily at what looked like an expensive restaurant. Emily appeared uncomfortable, her smile forced. Dinner at Le Bernardin in New York, February 2019. I flew Emily out for Valentine's Day to celebrate her first gallery showing. Preston turned the phone toward the crowd. Does this look like a casual relationship to you? Dr. Hayes leaned in to look at the photo. That's Emily, certainly, though she appears happy, Preston finished quickly. She was happy because I believed in her talent when nobody else did. Margaret's expression had hardened. Mr. Whitmore, I was Emily's curator from the beginning. She never mentioned— Of course she didn't mention me to her employees, Preston interrupted. Emily understood professional boundaries. She kept her personal and business relationships separate. That's when I noticed something in Preston's photo. Emily was wearing a long-sleeve sweater in February, but I could see the edge of a bruise on her wrist. I remembered that week. Emily had called me crying, saying she'd fallen down some stairs at Preston's apartment. Now I realized what had really happened. James Mitchell approached our group, his attorney badge visible on his lapel. Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm James Mitchell, Emily Peterson's estate attorney. I couldn't help overhearing this conversation. Preston's eyes lit up. Perfect timing. You can save us all some trouble by explaining the legal realities here. Oregon's common law marriage statutes clearly apply to my situation with Emily. James opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Mr. Whitmore, I've been expecting you. Emily was very specific about the possibility of this exact scenario. Good, Preston said confidently. Then you know I have legitimate claims. Actually, James said carefully, Emily anticipated someone might attempt to claim common law marriage status. She left detailed instructions about how to handle such claims. Preston's confidence wavered slightly. What kind of instructions? James glanced at me, then back at Preston. She required that any such claims be backed by substantial evidence. Financial records showing shared expenses, lease agreements with both names, joint bank accounts, that sort of thing. I can provide all of that, Preston said quickly. Can you? James asked mildly. Because Emily's records show that during your entire relationship she paid for everything. Restaurant bills, travel expenses, even your rent payments when you were between jobs. The crowd had grown larger. I counted at least 30 people now watching our conversation. Preston seemed to realize he was performing for a much bigger audience than he'd intended. Emily insisted on paying, Preston said defensively. She had trust issues about money. I was trying to help her develop financial independence. Fifth lie, and James Mitchell's expression suggested he knew exactly how false that claim was. Mr. Whitmore, Dr. Hayes interjected, I purchased several of Emily's early pieces. Her price points in 2019 were quite modest. I doubt she could afford expensive restaurants and travel. Preston's jaw tightened. She was more successful than she let on. Emily liked to appear humble, but she understood her market value. Margaret stepped forward. That's not true. Emily struggled financially throughout 2019. She worked double shifts at the diner to afford art supplies. You don't know what you're talking about, Preston snapped. Emily confided things to me that she never told her employees. Such as? James asked quietly. Preston hesitated for just a moment too long. Personal things, private conversations between two people who loved each other. I watched him scramble, realizing he was trapped in his own lies. The crowd had gone quiet, listening to every word. Mr. Whitmore, I said softly, if you loved Emily so much, why didn't you attend her funeral? The question hit like a physical blow. Preston's face flushed red. I was out of the country on business. I couldn't get back in time. Margaret's eyes widened. Emily's funeral was announced 2 weeks in advance. She was featured in Oregon Art Monthly. The Portland Tribune ran a full obituary. I don't read local papers, Preston muttered. But you read social media, Dr. Hayes observed, because that's how you learned about Emily's estate value, isn't it? Preston's composure was cracking. I learned about Emily's death through mutual friends who thought I should know. Which friends? James asked, pen poised over his notepad. I don't have to provide you with personal information. You do if you want to claim common law marriage status, James replied calmly. The court will require character witnesses who can testify about your relationship. Preston looked around the circle of faces. For the first time that evening, he seemed to realize he was surrounded by people who had actually known Emily, people who could contradict his every claim. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. I shouldn't have to prove my love for Emily to a bunch of strangers. We're not strangers, Margaret said firmly. We're Emily's friends and colleagues, people who watched her build this gallery from nothing. People who knew her real story, Dr. Hayes added. Preston's eyes darted from face to face, looking for an ally and finding none. Then his gaze settled on me. You, he said, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. You turned her against me, filled her head with working-class resentment about successful people. The accusation was so absurd that several people in the crowd actually laughed. That's when Preston made his biggest mistake of the evening. He decided to attack not just me, but everything Emily had valued about where she came from. Preston's mask finally slipped completely. The polished veneer disappeared, revealing the entitled rage underneath. You want to know the truth about Emily? He said, his voice carrying across the gallery. She was ashamed of this. He gestured dismissively at me, ashamed of growing up poor, ashamed of having a father who delivered mail for 40 years. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Several guests moved closer, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disapproval. Emily worked so hard to escape that small-minded, small-town mentality, Preston continued. She understood that success meant leaving the past behind, moving beyond the limitations of her upbringing. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not anger exactly, something calmer and more dangerous. She called you every day, I said quietly. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Obligation calls. She felt guilty about her success. It's common among people who rise above their social class. Margaret's face had gone pale with anger. That's not true. Emily spoke about her father constantly. She credited him with what? Preston laughed harshly. Teaching her to settle for mediocrity, to be grateful for scraps. Emily succeeded despite her background, not because of it. James Mitchell had been taking notes throughout this conversation. Now he looked up from his notepad with interest. Mr. Whitmore, you seem to have strong opinions about Emily's relationship with her father. I have realistic opinions, Preston corrected. Emily was brilliant. She deserved better than weekly guilt trips from someone who never understood her ambitions. Dr. Hayes frowned. Weekly guilt trips? Phone calls, Preston said with exasperation. Every few days the old man would call with some crisis or problem that needed Emily's attention. Her father was emotionally manipulative. Sixth lie. And this one revealed more about Preston than he realized. How do you know about Emily's phone calls? I asked. Preston hesitated. She told me about them. During your relationship that ended 9 years ago? Another hesitation. We stayed in touch. Emily valued my perspective on important decisions. James looked up from his notes. Mr. Whitmore, do you have records of these conversations with Emily? Phone logs, emails, text messages? Our communication was mostly verbal. Emily preferred personal conversations to digital records. Margaret stepped forward. That's strange. Emily documented everything about her business. She kept detailed records of every professional relationship. This wasn't business, Preston said quickly. This was personal, private. But I could see doubt creeping into the faces around us. Preston's story kept changing, his details kept shifting, and experienced business people recognized the patterns of deception. James closed his notepad. Mr. Whitmore, I think it would be helpful if you consulted with your own attorney before making any formal claims. Estate law is complex, and the evidence requirements are quite specific. I don't need to consult anyone, Preston said arrogantly. My family's legal team has handled estate disputes worth far more than $25 million. Then surely they've explained the documentation requirements, Dr. Hayes observed. Financial records, witness testimonies, evidence of shared domestic arrangements? Preston's confidence flickered again. I can provide whatever documentation the court requires. Can you? I asked softly. Something in my tone made Preston look at me more carefully. For the first time that evening, he seemed to notice that I hadn't appeared surprised by any of his claims. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It means Emily was very thorough," I said simply. James Mitchell smiled slightly. She was indeed. Emily understood the importance of detailed record-keeping. Preston's eyes darted between James and me. "What records?" "Bank statements, for instance," James said casually. Emily kept meticulous financial records. Every expense, every income source, every personal transaction. "Phone records, too," I added quietly. Emily believed in documenting important conversations. Preston's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." Margaret pulled out her phone. "Emily gave me access to her business files 2 weeks before she passed. She said there might be people who would try to claim credit for her success. People who had abandoned her when she needed them most," Dr. Hayes added, watching Preston's reaction carefully. Preston looked around the circle of faces, and for the first time that evening, I saw real fear in his eyes. "You can't possibly have records going back 9 years, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Emily kept everything," I said softly. "Every receipt, every contract, every conversation that mattered to her future." James opened his briefcase again, including some very interesting recordings from 2019. Preston went completely still. "What recordings?" "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," James suggested. "No," Preston said quickly. "No private discussions. Full transparency. Remember? That's what you wanted." I looked at him calmly. "Are you sure about that, Preston?" Because what Preston didn't realize was that Emily had recorded their final conversation. The one where he told her exactly what he thought about her, her dreams, and her future. And I had listened to that recording exactly once, 9 years ago, when Emily played it for me through tears. Now it was time for Preston to hear it again. Preston straightened his blazer and raised his voice, ensuring every person in the gallery could hear him clearly. "Fine, let's have full transparency right now." He gestured towards the elegant crowd surrounding us. "These people deserve to know who they're really dealing with." His voice carried across the marble floors, drawing even more attention. The gallery's main floor had gone quiet except for the soft classical music playing in the background. "Harold Peterson," Preston announced like he was presenting evidence in court, "is a retired postal worker who lives in a 1,500-square-foot ranch house in Beaverton. He drives a 2016 Honda Accord with duct tape on the seats. He shops at Walmart and Costco." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. This kind of public humiliation felt wrong, even to strangers. Emily Peterson was a brilliant artist who built a $25 million empire through talent, hard work, and business acumen. She moved in circles that included gallery owners, art collectors, and cultural influencers. Preston paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. "Now ask yourselves, which world do you think Emily really belonged to?" Dr. Hayes frowned deeply. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't see the relevance." "The relevance," Preston cut him off, "is that Emily outgrew her limitations. She understood that success requires leaving behind the people who hold you back." Margaret's voice was ice cold. "That's a disgusting thing to say about a daughter and her father." Preston turned on her aggressively. "It's the truth about social mobility. Emily was smart enough to recognize that her father's small-town values would limit her potential." "Her father supported her dreams from the beginning," Margaret protested. "Her father supported mediocrity," Preston shot back. "Do you know what his advice was when Emily wanted to move to Portland? Get a stable job with benefits? When she wanted to open her gallery? Art is a nice hobby, but you need steady income." Those words hit me like physical blows because they contained fragments of truth. I had worried about Emily's financial security. I had suggested she keep her waitressing job while building her art career. Preston saw my expression and pressed his advantage. "That's the voice of limited thinking," he continued, his voice growing louder. "The voice of someone who delivered mail for 40 years and thought that was success." The crowd had grown larger still. I estimated 50 people now watching this public destruction of my character. "Emily called me in tears after those conversations," Preston said, fabricating freely now. "She felt trapped between her love for her father and her ambitions for her future." "That's not true," I said quietly. "Isn't it?" Preston smiled cruelly. Then explain why Emily moved across the country to build her career. Explain why she never invited you to gallery openings or business meetings. Explain why she kept her personal and professional lives completely separate. Another fragment of truth twisted into a weapon. Emily had protected me from her business world, worried I'd feel out of place among art collectors and cultural elites. She was protecting you, Margaret said firmly. Emily understood that her father didn't enjoy large social gatherings. She was protecting herself, Preston corrected, from the embarrassment of explaining why a sophisticated artist had a father who couldn't discuss anything more complex than postal routes and pension plans. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Several guests stepped back, clearly disturbed by Preston's viciousness. James Mitchell looked up from his notepad. Mr. Whitmore, these personal attacks seem unnecessary for an estate discussion. They're necessary because they establish context, Preston replied. Emily lived in two worlds, the sophisticated world she built for herself and the limited world she came from. I was part of her sophisticated world. He gestured toward his expensive clothes, his Rolex, his perfectly styled appearance. I understood her ambitions because I shared them. We talked about art, culture, business strategy. We planned international exhibitions and high-end collector relationships. Preston turned back to me with obvious contempt. What did you and Emily talk about, Mr. Peterson? Weather? Television shows? Grocery store sales? The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the classical music seemed muted by the intensity of Preston's attack. We talked about everything, I said simply. Preston laughed harshly. Everything within your limited experience. But Emily needed more than small talk about mail delivery and retirement planning. Dr. Hayes stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, this has gone far enough. Has it? Preston spun toward him aggressively. Because I'm tired of pretending that social class doesn't matter in the art world. Emily understood that success required sophisticated connections, cultural knowledge, and social positioning. He pointed at me dismissively, none of which her father could provide. Margaret's voice shook with anger. Emily loved her father deeply. Emily felt obligated to her father, Preston corrected. There's a difference between love and guilt-driven loyalty. The distinction stung because I'd sometimes wondered if Emily called me out of duty rather than genuine affection. Preston seemed to sense my doubt and pressed harder. Ask yourself this, Mr. Peterson. If Emily valued your input so highly, why didn't she ask your advice about major business decisions? Why didn't she include you in strategy meetings or financial planning? Because Emily had protected me from decisions I wouldn't have understood. She'd handled complex negotiations and international relationships while sharing only the results with me. Why didn't she bring you to gallery openings or industry events? Why did she keep you separated from the world she was building? Because Emily knew I'd feel uncomfortable in rooms full of wealthy strangers discussing art I didn't understand. Preston's voice rose to a crescendo. I'll tell you why. Because Emily was embarrassed by her background, and she was planning to leave it behind completely. The words hung in the air like poison. She succeeded despite you, Mr. Peterson, not because of you. That's when I asked the question Emily had taught me to ask. Preston, I said quietly, would you like to hear what Emily really thought about you? For the first time that evening, Preston looked genuinely surprised. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone. I mean exactly what I said. Preston stared at my phone with growing confusion. What's that supposed to be? Emily's voice, I said simply, scrolling through files. From April 15th, 2019, the day you left her. Preston's face went white. That's impossible. Emily recorded all her important conversations, James Mitchell explained calmly. She learned that habit from her business law professor at Portland State. Margaret stepped closer. Emily told me she started recording after her first art dealer tried to cheat her. She said documentation protected artists from people who wanted to rewrite history. You can't just record people without consent, Preston protested. Oregon is a one-party consent state, James replied. As long as one person in the conversation agrees to the recording, it's completely legal. I found the file I was looking for. Emily called me that night, Preston. She played your conversation for me because she needed someone to confirm she wasn't crazy. Preston's confident demeanor had completely evaporated. I don't believe you. Would you like me to play it? I asked politely. The gallery had gone silent. 50-plus guests waited for Preston's response. "Play what?" he demanded, but his voice cracked slightly. "Your final conversation with Emily. The one where you explained exactly what you thought about her art, her dreams, and her future." Preston looked around desperately. "This is ridiculous. Even if such a recording existed, it would be private conversation between two people who loved each other." "Love is an interesting word choice," Dr. Hayes observed dryly. I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the gallery, clear and unmistakable. "Preston, I need to know if you're coming back. I can't keep living in uncertainty." Preston's recorded voice responded with casual cruelty. "Jesus, Emily, look around. You're living in a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant. You paint pictures of flowers and sell them for $50 at farmers markets." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. This wasn't the voice of someone who believed in Emily's talent. Recorded Preston continued. "I'm 24 years old. My family has connections in New York, London, Paris. You want me to throw that away to play house with a waitress who thinks finger painting is art?" Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Several guests exchanged shocked glances. Emily's voice, quieter now. "I thought you said my work had potential. I said lots of things to make you happy. But let's be realistic about your ceiling here. You're cute, you're sweet, but you're not sophisticated enough for serious art markets." Preston, standing in the gallery, had gone completely pale. "Turn that off." "I didn't turn it off," recorded Preston. "My family moves in circles where people collect Picassos and Pollocks. You paint pretty pictures for people who shop at Target." Emily. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I need someone who can navigate high society events. Someone who understands art history and cultural references. Someone who won't embarrass me at gallery openings." The gallery crowd was listening with visible disgust. These were exactly the kind of high society art people Preston claimed to understand. Recorded Preston delivered his final blow. "Face it, Em. You're a small-town girl who thinks big, but you don't have the background or education to compete at elite levels. Find yourself a nice teacher or accountant and paint as a hobby." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "What about everything we planned together? What we planned? I talked, you listened. That's not collaboration, that's me being polite to my girlfriend." The recording ended. The gallery stayed silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Hayes spoke quietly. "Well, that certainly clarifies Mr. Whitmore's perspective on Emily's potential." Preston looked around desperately. That was 9 years ago. People say things they don't mean when relationships end badly. Margaret's voice was ice cold. "You called her art finger painting." "I was upset. You said she wasn't sophisticated enough for serious art markets," James Mitchell added, consulting his notes. "Relationships are complicated." "You told her to find a nice teacher and paint as a hobby," I said quietly. Preston's famous confidence had completely collapsed. "You don't understand the context." "The context," Dr. Hayes interrupted, "is that you're standing in a gallery showcasing $25 million worth of the finger paintings you dismissed." Margaret gestured toward Emily's masterpiece. "That painting you called worthless sold for $340,000 last month." "Her work is featured in the Portland Art Museum," James added. "She was profiled in Art in America magazine," Dr. Hayes continued. "The Smithsonian acquired 2 of her pieces for their permanent collection," Margaret finished. Preston looked around the room at faces full of contempt and disgust. "This is all taken out of context," he said desperately. "Young men say stupid things. I came here tonight to honor Emily's memory." "You came here to claim half her estate," I corrected, "because I deserved recognition for my contribution to her success." Margaret laughed bitterly. "Your contribution? You told her to give up and marry an accountant. I provided emotional support during her developmental years. You told her she wasn't sophisticated enough for serious art," Dr. Hayes said flatly. Preston's voice rose defensively. "I was trying to protect her from disappointment. The art world is brutal. Most artists fail." "So you tried to make her fail faster," James observed. "I tried to give her realistic expectations." "You tried to destroy her confidence," Margaret corrected. That's when I pulled out the second document from my jacket pocket. "Preston," I said calmly, "would you like to see what Emily really thought about your emotional support?" His eyes fixed on the manila folder in my hands with growing terror. "What is that?" "Emily's will," I said simply. "The part specifically about you." James Mitchell smiled slightly. Mr. Peterson, perhaps you'd like to read that section aloud. I opened the folder to a page marked with Emily's handwriting. Regarding Preston Whitmore III, I read in a clear voice that carried across the gallery, I specifically exclude him from any inheritance, benefit, or claim upon my estate. Preston's legs seemed to wobble. Emily's reasoning, I continued, is documented in her own words. Preston abandoned me when I needed support, dismissed my artistic ambitions as worthless, and actively tried to convince me to abandon my dreams. He represents everything I struggled to overcome. The crowd stared at Preston with obvious disgust, but I wasn't finished. There's more, I said quietly, because Emily's will contained one final surprise that would destroy Preston's credibility forever. I continued reading from Emily's will. Furthermore, Preston Whitmore III owes me $67,000 in unpaid loans from our relationship period, documented with receipts and bank statements, which I hereby forgive only to ensure he has no legal connection to my estate whatsoever. Preston's mouth fell open. That's not true. James Mitchell opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Actually, we have complete documentation. Restaurant bills, rent payments, car repairs, clothing purchases, all paid by Emily, all promised to be repaid by you. Those weren't loans, Preston protested weakly. Those were gifts between people in a relationship. Do you have documentation showing they were gifts? James asked mildly. Margaret's expression was pure disgust. So you didn't just abandon Emily emotionally. You robbed her financially too. Dr. Hayes shook his head. $67,000 from a struggling artist's savings. She insisted on paying, Preston said desperately. I tried to pay my own way, but Emily wanted to demonstrate her independence. Seventh lie. And the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. James pulled out another document. We also have Emily's personal journals from that period, detailed entries about lending you money for job interview clothes, car payments, and apartment deposits. She wrote about crying herself to sleep because she couldn't afford art supplies after paying your bills, Margaret added quietly. The gallery crowd murmured with disgust. Several people had pulled out phones to record Preston's humiliation. But perhaps most interesting, I said, returning Emily's will to the folder, is the document Emily asked me to give you if you ever showed up. Preston looked at me with naked fear. What document? I pulled out a legal-sized envelope sealed with Emily's signature across the back flap. She wrote this the day after your final conversation. She wanted you to have it if you ever tried to claim credit for her success. Preston stared at the envelope like it contained a bomb. I don't want to read any more of Emily's private thoughts. Then I'll read it for you, I said calmly. I broke Emily's seal and unfolded a single handwritten page. Preston, I read aloud. If you're hearing this letter, it means you've returned to claim credit for achievements you told me I'd never accomplish. Preston's face had gone from pale to gray. You once said I wasn't sophisticated enough for serious art markets. You said my work was finger painting for people who shop at Target. You said I should find a nice teacher and paint as a hobby. The gallery crowd listened with rapt attention to Emily's words from beyond the grave. But most importantly, you said I didn't have the background or education to compete at elite levels. You were wrong about that, Preston, but you were right about one thing. I paused, letting tension build. I did need to leave my past behind to succeed. The part of my past I needed to leave behind was you. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. Several guests nodded approvingly. Emily's letter continued. If you're hearing this, it means you've learned about my success and decided you deserve a share. It means you've forgotten your own words about my limitations and potential. Preston looked around desperately for escape routes. So let me remind you of your own advice, Preston. You told me to be realistic about my ceiling. You told me to find someone who wouldn't hold me back. You told me I'd never amount to anything in serious art circles. I looked up at Preston before reading Emily's final words. I took your advice, Preston. I was realistic about my ceiling, and I shattered it. I found someone who wouldn't hold me back, and I married my art instead of my limitations. And I proved that small-town girls with big dreams can build empires that trust fund boys can only dream of claiming. The gallery erupted in spontaneous applause. Preston stood frozen as 200 people clapped for Emily's posthumous victory over his cruelty. When the applause died down, I folded Emily's letter carefully. Preston, I said quietly, "Emily's estate attorney has one more document for you." James Mitchell handed Preston a legal notice. "This is a cease and desist order," James explained professionally. "Any further attempts to claim inheritance rights, make public statements about Emily's estate, or contact family members will result in immediate legal action." Preston's hands shook as he read the document. "Additionally," James continued, "security footage from tonight's conversation will be provided to local media outlets that have requested statements about Emily's estate." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, you're no longer welcome at Whitfield Gallery or any of our partner institutions." Dr. Hayes added coldly, "I'll be informing the Portland art community about tonight's conversation. Your reputation in these circles is finished." Preston looked around the room at faces full of contempt and disgust. His sophisticated social connections, his family's influence, his expensive clothes and accessories, none of it mattered anymore. He was exposed as exactly what Emily had recognized 9 years ago, a predator who claimed credit for other people's achievements. "This isn't over," he said weakly. "Yes," I replied calmly, "it is." Security guards appeared at Preston's shoulders. Margaret had signaled them during his breakdown. "Sir," one guard said politely, "we need to ask you to leave the premises." Preston straightened his blazer one final time, trying to recover some dignity. But as he walked toward the gallery exit, past Emily's paintings worth millions of dollars, past the 200 witnesses who'd watched his humiliation, his shoulders sagged with the weight of complete defeat. The trust fund boy who'd dismissed Emily's dreams had just learned the cost of underestimating quiet people with long memories. And I wasn't finished with him yet. The morning after Preston's humiliation, Margaret called me with news. "Harold, you need to see this morning's Portland Tribune." The headline read, "Trust Fund Heir Exposed in Gallery Confrontation." Below it, a photo of Preston being escorted from the Whitfield Gallery by security guards. The article quoted several witnesses from the evening, including Dr. Hayes. Mr. Whitmore's behavior was appalling. He attempted to claim credit for work he had specifically told the artist she'd never achieve. But the real damage came from social media. Margaret forwarded me screenshots from Portland's art community forums. Gallery owners were sharing Preston's recorded voice dismissing Emily's work as finger painting. Collectors posted photos from the memorial exhibition with captions about protecting artists from predators. "It gets worse," Margaret said. 3 other artists have come forward claiming Preston used similar tactics with them, promising support, then disappearing when they couldn't finance his lifestyle. James Mitchell called an hour later with legal updates. "Preston's family attorney contacted me this morning. They're withdrawing all estate claims and requesting no further media coverage." James chuckled. "Apparently the Whitmore textile fortune doesn't appreciate public association with emotional abuse scandals." "What about the $67,000? I asked. "They've offered to pay it to Emily's Memorial Scholarship Fund. Full amount plus interest. They want this story to disappear completely." By afternoon, the ripple effects had spread beyond Portland. Art in America magazine called for a statement about predatory relationships in emerging artist communities. The Portland Art Museum issued a press release supporting their acquisition of Emily's work and condemning attempts to diminish artist achievements posthumously. Dr. Hayes visited the gallery that evening with news about Preston's broader social consequences. "His membership at the Portland Cultural Club has been revoked," he reported. 3 board positions rescinded. His family's company issued a statement distancing themselves from his personal conduct. Margaret smiled grimly. "Good. Artists need protection from people who use relationships to claim creative credit." The most satisfying news came from James Mitchell the following week. Preston attempted to get a job at a New York gallery, he told me over coffee. The Portland art community's social media posts had already reached Manhattan. His interview lasted 15 minutes. But the story's impact went beyond Preston's personal destruction. Emily's scholarship fund, established with Preston's repayment money, received additional donations, totaling over $200,000. Applications poured in from struggling artists across the Pacific Northwest. Margaret framed Emily's letter to Preston and hung it in the gallery's main corridor. Visitors often stopped to read it, and many left inspired comments about persevering through discouragement. "Emily's voice is reaching more artists now than she ever imagined," Margaret observed. The gallery's success continued growing. Emily's paintings appreciated in value as collectors recognized the personal story behind each piece. Museums requested exhibitions featuring her work alongside other artists who'd overcome early dismissal. Preston himself simply vanished from Portland's social scene. James Mitchell heard through legal circles that he'd moved back to his family's estate in Connecticut, attempting to rebuild his reputation in environments where Emily's story hadn't penetrated. But the internet is forever, Margaret reminded me. Every time someone searches Preston Whitmore, they'll find videos of him being escorted out by security guards. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a Connecticut Society page. Preston had announced his engagement to a woman whose family owned several New England art galleries. Attached was a handwritten note. Some people never learn. I showed the clipping to Margaret, who laughed darkly. Poor woman, someone should warn her. Someone probably will, I replied. The art world is smaller than Preston realizes. Emily's legacy had become bigger than either of us anticipated. Her story inspired artists to document their relationships carefully, to protect themselves from people who might later claim credit for their achievements. Preston had tried to steal Emily's success and ended up amplifying her influence instead. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people reveal their true character to the world. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, the world pays attention. 3 years have passed since that November evening at the Whitfield Gallery. Emily's art empire continues growing under Margaret's expert management. The Scholarship Fund has supported 47 emerging artists, many of whom credit Emily's story with giving them courage to pursue their dreams despite early discouragement. I still live in my modest ranch house in Beaverton, still drive my Honda Accord with duct tape repairs. But something fundamental changed that night. I learned that quiet people with long memories can be more powerful than loud people with short attention spans. The Postal Service taught me patience. Emily taught me preparation. Preston taught me that sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply letting someone destroy themselves publicly. I keep Emily's will and recordings in a safety deposit box downtown, along with other documents I hope never to need again. But artists and their families sometimes contact me for advice about protecting their work from predatory relationships. My standard response is simple: document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that people who genuinely support your success don't need to claim credit for your achievements. Preston never contacted me again after that night. According to James Mitchell's occasional updates, he married the Connecticut gallery owner's daughter, and now works managing her family's collection. Apparently, he learned to appreciate other people's accomplishments without claiming them as his own. Or maybe he just learned to be more careful about who's recording the conversation. I visit Emily's grave every Sunday, updating her on gallery news and scholarship recipients. I tell her about the artists who found courage in her story, the predators who've been exposed through documentation, the quiet victories achieved by people who refuse to be underestimated. Emily always believed that art should change people for the better. Her final masterpiece wasn't a painting hanging on gallery walls. It was the lesson that quiet strength, patient preparation, and long memory can defeat loud arrogance every time. The memorial exhibition that night was supposed to honor Emily's artistic legacy. Instead, it became something more important. Proof that small-town values and working-class dignity are more powerful than trust fund entitlement and social sophistication. Preston thought he was dealing with a simple postal worker who'd gotten lucky with inheritance money. He was wrong about that, just like he'd been wrong about Emily's potential. Some mistakes cost $25 million. Others cost your entire reputation. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember, never underestimate quiet people. We're usually preparing for something.